from the shores of beautiful Lake Coeur d'Alene in the heart of North Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discuss their topics on our forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Today's program, we're always very pleased to come into your businesses, your homes with our program. Today's topic is a very important and a very serious one. We're going to discuss the problem of violence in schools, and as you all know, we've had some awful tragedies in America in recent years with violence in our schools across America. Our guest today is highly qualified to address this subject, and we're very fortunate that he would come and be with us today. We welcome to the program David Rawls, who serves as the superintendent of the Coeur d'Alene School District. It's known as School District 271 in Idaho. Our guest holds a baccalaureate degree from Washington State University, a master's degree from Seattle University, and has done postmaster's graduate work. He taught chemistry and physics for 19 years. He is a former principal. He is also the former assistant superintendent and the superintendent of the Moses Lake School District or area, and he was in that capacity when they had the very, very serious and terrible tragedy some years ago. Mr. Rawls, it's very, very fortunate on our part to have you here. Thank you for coming and discussing this very important topic.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it is a very important topic and one that unfortunately has received a great amount of importance in an unfortunate way, because we wouldn't like to have that to be the number one topic, and I certainly don't want to be carrying any other than a very deep concern for the safety of students all over the nation. And unfortunately, schools are places where kids are, and we have seen now instances, wasn't this summer, I believe, or was this fall, last month or two, where even churches now where children are no longer places where we can be assured that safety really does exist.
And we'll get into those with you, and thank you very much. I want to also introduce our panel. We're very pleased to have our regular panelists with us, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and Janelle will ask our first series of questions.
Well, Mr. Rawls, what exactly do we mean by safety in the schools, and how prevalent is any problem that we might perceive out there?
Well, there isn't anyone that works in school that wouldn't put safety at the top of their list, and I think even our mission statement here in District 271, I have it here in front of me, and it says, in part, the board believes that a positive school climate and a physically safe, secure environment is an essential component of an educational process. That would be a common statement that you would find in almost every, I would venture to say every school district, and every administrator's first priority, and every classroom teacher, every school bus driver, we're all thinking the same thing. Safety for our children is number one. We can't have education occur where students don't feel safe. It doesn't take away from that concern to realize that there haven't been really very many student deaths relative to the total number in schools. It doesn't make it less of a concern that there have only been a few, because even one, if it's your child, is a major, massive, heartbreaking event. And if it's your child and you're the administrator in that school, because all those children there are essentially under your care during the time they're there.
There have always been playground fights, and some students have been injured. Are things different now?
Well, apparently there is enough of a turn here for all of us to take some concern. There are some commonalities, the statements that have been made by a number of the students, and even the research by the Federal Bureau of FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, has kind of come to some fairly common patterns. But there have always been teasing in schools, and we probably have seen that. There have been, though, an increasing number of instances where our society has, in a sense, glorified violence. And if you're an internet or web page viewer, you could find a great number of instances where web pages are really designed to aid students in taking their violent thoughts to an action role. And so I think schools have always had to deal with playground instances. We continue to. It's just those very few cases where students have essentially risen to a much higher level of violence that are causing us all a great concern.
Steve Sheen.
David, we tend to focus on those just tragic events. As you say, that loss of life, even one, is a heartbreaking thing, and it's headline news across America.
Right.
What about the other kinds of violence, though, that you probably deal with much more commonly, but that doesn't make headline news?
Well, I would say fortunately, and I mean that really sincerely, we have a strong community here in Coeur d'Alene. And likewise we have across the country in varying degrees. I think we're probably as positioned as well as any to have parent support groups. And we have parents who participate in the life of their children and in the life of the activities. But it's always a relative point. No high school has ever been satisfied, I think, with the total number of parents that come to open houses or middle schools. We have more parent involvement here in Coeur d'Alene, though, than I'm used to. I'm glad to see that. But we're always dealing with student discipline. I was looking at our numbers. In fact, I think I probably have a chart with those on them. And last year, we had expulsions for 19 students. Those 19 students, about half of them involved some form of a drug-related issue. Mm-hmm. And the other half involved some form of a weapon or something, but no guns, no firearms. We had clubs and some knives and some objects that could cause harm. Now, those are the extreme cases. You know, in a school district or in a school system, all of your discipline issues sort of filter themselves up to the top, if you will, and you end up at the board hearing for those very serious situations. The board takes a very strong stand on that. But I don't know that I could say that we have had an increasing number overall of discipline issues, but we've had an increasing number at a lower age. More early, middle grade school, 4th, 5th, where you see behaviors that are causing students to be suspended, which in the past might not have occurred. We've had students brought for expulsion from the middle school for threatening to kill someone. Those threats are not taken as playground talk. They're taken very seriously.
And as you look back over the entire span of your career, is that what you're seeing now? Is that a trend that you've watched steadily increase?
Why? I don't know that I can say it has been a trend that I've studied that much. As you know, as Tony talked earlier, I was an administrator for most of my career. I've been the latter half here. And during that time, I think we would have to agree that in the discipline work that I've done, it seemed like we are seeing more serious cases at an earlier age. And I would imagine that was true. I think that was true in Moses Lake. We're seeing that too. In fact, I remember one of our police officers in Moses Lake commenting to me one time that the student who had the longest rap sheet, I guess that's the right term, the longest number of instances of police intervention was a 4th grader. So, yeah, that's pretty serious for our society to have students. And just looking over the other day, we have students in our juvenile detention here that are not out of grade school.
Thank you.
And some of the tragedies, Mr. Rawls, that have taken place around the country in Colorado, for example, and that it's on our minds so much because of how incredibly tragic that was. And there have been others in other places that we can point to, in Arkansas and other places. The media, at least, has tried to communicate with us some kind of profile from your work, and you talk to a lot of other people in education. And I know you've been contacted by a number, I believe the superintendent in Colorado.
Yes.
Is there a profile developing that student that's more likely to be deviant in their behavior with violence?
There does seem to be a pattern, and fortunately for us that are male, all of them have been male. So that already puts us, half the population's already under suspect, if you will. All of them have been male. all of them have involved a firearm. The others, all of them seem, there's several other things. Cruelty to animals seems to have been part of their background. That also is a factor that seems to be in the line of others that cause society great concern. Behaviors that result in either harm to others, either in a sexual nature or in a physical nature. Harm to animals seems to be a precursor to that. So it's one of the factors that they see. Being disrespected. That's interesting. The comment is the students were disrespected by their mothers is a common comment. That doesn't mean that they are disrespectful to others, but they are being disrespected. Everyone who works in school discipline or works in police work knows one of the fundamental rules that you try and follow is show respect. Respect every person. And that's one factor that's been there. Another factor is the fact that they premeditated or pre-planned these events, and in most cases showed little or no remorse. And the other factor, the one that we need to spend the most time looking at in school, is that they felt that they were either different or singled out, and in some way felt that violence was the avenue to equalize things. So it may have been a factor of teasing. Certainly that was an alleged factor in the case in Moses Lake. We weren't aware of that ahead of time. Other risk factors always are there, but those are the ones that people have been pointing to. That's been the FBI profile. It doesn't mean that we've, and I have a statement back in the back of my notes from a presentation I made the other day that kind of answers some of this. It says that this was from Executive Director of the National School Safety Center. He said, despite all the high-tech safety strategies, there isn't a metal scanner that will determine whether a youngster is going to commit an act of violence. So unfortunately, even with all those indicators, we can't run a scanner over the population of Coeur d'Alene to determine tonight who it is that the police should pick up this afternoon so that they will not be able to commit the crime that they're going to commit tonight. We're not that good in society in predetermining behaviors.
One final question in that arena. From some of the profiles and alleged environmental situations that some of the individuals that engaged in violence were somewhat isolated within the school. They were mavericks within their class. Is that a valid conclusion?
Well, yes, it is. That factor of being separate and alone. And as far as our preventative behaviors in schools, our preventative strategies, the strategy that is most commonly talked about as being the key, if you will, is to make sure that schools create cultures within them where no child is alone, no child is anonymous, no child is without some adult, caring adult, and a caring group of friends or people who care and know that child well. It's creating a culture where we have essentially in a society that believes that everyone is valued here. And I'm not so sure that that isn't possible within a large school. Coeur d'Alene High School and Lake City High School both have strong programs to make sure that incoming freshmen are linked into the school. Freshman connection is a terminology used. Making sure that there is a connection between seniors and freshmen. But this aloneness or the separateness is a important risk factor that we need to take notice of. And certainly schools that ignore the aloneness of a particular individual, I think, are putting that child more at risk.
That's very helpful for us. Janelle Burke.
If a parent or someone who's in the neighborhood or someone who just knows a young person is concerned about them or their behaviors, what should they do relative to the school? Should they go to the school? What kind of steps should these people take to avoid some of those safety problems?
Well, I don't know that we certainly would welcome any information. The other component, not only creating this culture I talked about, but the other component that we're working on as a school is act on tips. Mm-hmm. That's a phrase that we've always used. We need to know as much as we can, as soon as we can. We act on those tips. We never assume that they are just irrelevant. You can't make that assumption any more than you can ignore a bomb threat. You just can't. You can't take that risk. But any information you have, now the governor of the state of Idaho has recently contracted through his office with a firm, I'm not sure the name of it, but it's a Midwest firm, and they are providing free to the patrons of the state of Idaho a chance to call a number. I don't have that with me, but it will be soon publicized widely, and they would be able to give that information if they chose to do so anonymously. If you're able and willing to do so, though, I think every school would welcome that tip or that sharing of information. I have an example or two in here of tips that we've received that you have to respond to. When you get a tip, it's just as bright as shining a light on you. You must respond. You have to put every bit of resources you can around that student and make sure that you're taking into consideration all the avenues you have for intervening in the life of that child if you have that tip. And especially if it's someone who you have some credibility with, and if it's a neighbor and they have a pattern, or a family member, that's really helpful.
Where do you suggest people go in terms of the school? Should they go to the principal? Do they go to guidance counselors? Where do they kind of go? Because I think in a general way, maybe individual school districts would have different ways of approaching this problem, but just in a general way, because we're going to have a lot of general viewers out there.
Well, I'd say you call the school and they'll take care of you. I would say wouldn't be a school that if you make that call. Now, principal would be ideal. If you can't reach them, reach the secretary and refer the call on. Call the guidance counselor. If that's a bit threatening to you because you don't want to give it away, call this 1-800 anonymous number. But I would imagine there wouldn't be a school principal or anyone in our viewing audience or anyone in the state that if they were to call their school with information about a student that they were concerned about, that they'd be turned away and rebuffed as if it was not important. So a principal would be the one who I would direct your call to first at every school, and then he'd have an opportunity, she would have an opportunity to refer it on to the guidance counselor.
Steve Sheen.
David, what are some of the specific strategies that you employ and recommend for dealing with an at-risk student?
Well, that's the at-risk student category carries with it all kinds of characteristics. Students who are at risk because they have social factors. They don't have those resiliency factors in place. They don't have the support systems around them. Plus, the terminology for at-risk also carries with it the idea that they're just not doing very well in school. And so there isn't a single strategy for that. As far as safety is concerned for the at-risk student, we provide in most schools a number of things, such as guidance counseling, of course, and we'd like to have more of those. But in the districts here in Coeur d'Alene, we have an interesting added advantage. We have a collaborative relationship with two different agencies. Our police department, we provide approximately half of the funding comes from a grant through our police department and from the district for school resource officers. I just noticed the other day that an adjoining district north of us is going to do the same thing. Having if you will, an officer friendly, a person in the school who is fully commissioned as an officer, can provide that sense of security. But they really do end up being a confidant to many students. And I think the at-risk student once has just another person in the school, other than a school administrator, if you will, or a teacher, someone else to go to talk about problems. We have counselors in schools, we have that. Of course, the at-risk student in many ways has the support system of his peers. That's the group that I think we need to develop. That's why we have natural helper programs. That's why we have peer mediator programs. That we have those programs because really it's not up to the administration, the school resource officer, the teachers, the officialdom, if you will, of a school to make a school safe. Schools are safe when the students, as a community, help make the school safe. I found that very important, that you don't point the finger at someone else. You turn it inward. Say, this school is safe because we take responsibility, we meaning the student body, to make our school safe. So a lot of the at-risk support is in developing the support of their peers to provide that support for the students. That's not something that everyone realizes.
Sounds like your number one focus is to identify students who might be in trouble one way or the other. Take those tips seriously, and then make connections. Obviously, try to help the student. But you earlier in the show you mentioned 19 expulsions in your district last year. How important is it to communicate to students, their parents, the faculty and staff of the school, the community in general, that you mean business about certain issues, that they won't be tolerated?
Well, certainly, I think that fair warning is very important, and this school district and many have taken what we might term in quotes zero tolerance approach. Zero tolerance meaning if you bring a weapon, you put your education at risk. If you deal drugs in the school, you put your education at risk. Those are the two. And weapon we broadly define as, of course, we think of in terms of a firearm, but we also think in terms of guns. I'm sorry, in terms of knives or clubs or even a sharpened object, any object that normally we would be using that could be used or is used or threatens to be used to harm another person. Those, we have to have signage on your school. You need to be sure you've said no weapons are allowed, no smoking, please, on these campuses, no drug dealing on these campuses. You need to sign that as you enter that campus, not on the building, by the way, as you enter the campus. So it's very important to have signage right at the beginnings of the school campus, and we appeal to our adults to help us out with the no smoking part. It's illegal for our students to smoke on campus, not really illegal for adults. By policy, we request that our adults help us out with that, trying to create a smoke-free environment. But that warning sign, we also have policies, and in the district, we send every year, Wanda Quinn, our chair, and myself, we've co-signed a letter, addressed it to each of our parents, and in that we've included our district policy on this zero tolerance. So we want to make sure that no one misses the message. If you do it, you're bringing your career of education to a very quick halt.
And if Tony will let me ask one quick follow-up question. You mentioned Wanda Quinn, you're chairperson of your board,
yes.
School board. How important is it to educate that board and get them involved in these decisions?
Well, policy setting is, of course, the board's domain, and again, mission statement, board's domain. No district operates without good board. In Moses Lake, by the way, one of the factors that helped us survive and manage to get through that was, and I tried to compliment them many times, was the strong support of the school board, and they came forward and they spent most of several days and weekends and multiple evenings together, staying together, tightly supporting, getting this district back together again. So having your board educated about the importance of putting resources behind a statement of zero tolerance. They have to fund resource officers. They have to be able to fund counselors and provide the money so that schools can, in fact, do what they can to work the at-risk problem.
Thank you.
I'm going to follow up on Steve's question. It was an excellent question dealing with the board and its policies and administration, how you carry it, and also this very important idea of informing the families what will not be allowed at the school. But also public policy comes into play, and laws in the state, and there's been a debate in a number of states. So would you address that question? How can those who are in charge of public policy can be so helpful with this? This is a growing problem. There's no question about it. And I have a second part of that question. That would be, can a school district, by policy, cover something if state law does not address the question?
Well, there's an interesting couple of parts of that question. Let me take the last part first, because there really isn't a clear answer to that. In some cases, certainly constitutional law cannot be superseded by state law.
Right.
You'd think that would be true then, that policies which are subordinate to state law couldn't conflict, but they can actually be stronger. It is possible in some cases, where the board policy to be stronger than the state law.
The statute.
Than the statute. And in that case, there's no clear answer to that question, but policy and law really can help. I'm not sure that, this kind of getting off the subject a little bit from what your question, but an area where I don't think we've all decided what role it should play is in somewhat of a control over media. We don't know yet from the Supreme Court level on down, how restrictive, if at all, we as a society feel we should be about media. And yet, when you can go on to the www.bombmaking.com, I'm just making that one up, and open it up and find all the details about exactly how to construct a bomb that could be used to destroy, well, I guess in this case, hundreds of children in a school, you might wonder, is that's perfectly appropriate for our society with its free flow of information, the marketplace of ideas. We've all learned those constitutional terms. But it causes I think we need to go through some discussion as a society as we try and wrestle out this issue of where does law help us and where should we be on the issue of availability of information about how to harm other people. And I don't know the answer to that. It's a puzzle for me. I think it's worth a coffee cup discussion kind of thing. But when websites and video games are used as examples of the ways, and one called Rage, where you go in and what you do is blow away the kids in your school and watch them fall away, and the more you shoot, the better it is, and the higher the score you get, and that's a video game you can buy. Is that okay?
So one of the dilemmas that we have here is,
question.
Yes, when your board's making policy or the legislature's passing laws, the question that always is in the front, are you adopting any policy that the high court might declare violates the Constitution of the United States, which is the highest law? So I can appreciate that. We're just about out of time, but I would say, I think I hear you saying that even though a state, not constitutional law, but a statute that might be somewhat liking in certain restrictions, that the policy of the board can go beyond that because it's not a constitutional question, unless they get involved with the Constitution.
Well, in one interesting area, I think we could look for some change is in the amount of time that a school administrator can suspend a student. It seems relatively short to realize that a school administrator in the state of Idaho can suspend a student for no more than 5 days.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you at that point. I wish we could continue. We're out of time, and
okay.
We'll have you back another time and
All right.
continue this discussion. On behalf of the staff, thank you so much. David Rawls, from Superintendent of the Coeur d'Alene School District.
Sure.
Very grateful to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have found this program very, very informative to you, and we're very appreciative to our guests for dealing with a subject that is dear to all of you and very important to all of you, and the safety of all children within our schools. Please be with us again next week, and we'll discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum is the longest-running public television show of its type in North America and is seen in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational community outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another new edition of North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.